Hello, and welcome to Season 4 of the Wedding Whisperer podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Burton, wedding concierge and owner of Simply Love Studio, coming to you from the heart of Central Kentucky. Around here, weddings are more than a single day. They're about family tradition, a little bit of chaos, and a whole lot of love. And my job is to help you navigate all of that with clarity and confidence while staying on budget. At Simply Love Studio, I help couples plan their weddings for free, connecting you with the right vendors, realistic timelines, and thoughtful guidance so that you can enjoy the process. This season, we're diving deeper into real connections, what works, what doesn't, and how to plan a wedding that truly feels like you. Whether you're newly engaged, deep in planning, or just love a good behind-the-scenes wedding story, you're in the right place. Today's episode is one that I am super excited about. It has been on my list of episodes that I have wanted to record since season 1. However, I did not necessarily have a personal contact for this company or for this type of company. And this company reached out a couple weeks ago just to share a little bit about themselves. And I was like, I need to have you on the podcast. And we are going to be talking all things wedding insurance today. I talk about this in every single one of my couple meetings, but honestly, while I know that you need wedding insurance, I don't know the ins and outs of it because it's something that I've never had to personally purchase. I don't know someone that has used it. They would have used it if they'd had it. So we are going to talk all things wedding insurance today. So buckle up and be ready. We're probably going to talk some things that may be uncomfortable to hear, but that's what we're here for. So, David, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Happy to be here and more than happy to help everyone out with understanding wedding insurance. And I'll try to stay away from any of the uncomfortable portions.
So, David, tell me a little bit about eWed. You were just telling me that you were a planner for more than 20 years before going into this industry. Walk me through a little bit of your background and how you've ended up where you're at now.
Certainly, my background goes all over the place, but I'll start with about 27 years. Now it's 30 something years ago. I started out as a wedding planner. I met a gentleman who was doing weddings, and we started a company, did weddings all over the world, did ultra high-end weddings. And I got introduced to the concept of wedding insurance about 7 years ago. And I said, that's really interesting. I plan more weddings than I can count. And the way I looked at it is, someone's having $1 million wedding and something goes wrong. They've probably got another $1 million to spend on a wedding. But if someone saved their whole life for a $30,000 wedding and something goes wrong, they probably don't have another $30,000 just to spend. And that's where wedding insurance can really come in and help save the day. And I was fascinated by the concept of instead of just, working with, the highest ends of society and doing ultra expensive weddings. I said, you know what, I want to do something that everyone can use. And knowing nothing about wedding insurance, I just started doing research. 2 years later, eWed launched.
That's awesome. I feel like a lot of us in the wedding industry have ended up where we're at now because it started with the thought and it just kind of kept going.
Correct. And when I started it, and remember, 30 something years ago, there was no such thing as a wedding planner, as a profession, as a college degree. We just made it up as we went.
When I started my business in 2008, I was from a small town and no one there had any idea exactly what I was trying to tell people I did. So I completely relate to that.
Today, people might get into wedding planning, coming out of high school saying, I want to be a wedding planner. Not when I was growing up. Not when you were growing up.
Let's talk wedding insurance. We will talk about it from a couple standpoint from the beginning. I'm assuming wedding insurance is a whole lot like concept-wise, kind of like a car insurance, a house insurance. You're insuring your wedding day.
That's correct. Everyone refers to it as wedding insurance. And one of the first things I do, I get phone calls saying, I need wedding insurance. And the first thing I do is I say, let's take a step back, saying wedding insurance is a generic term for two types of insurance. There's cancellation loss of deposit insurance, which can reimburse you if you have to cancel or postpone the wedding due to things like fires, floods, accidents, illness, injury, severe weather. And then the other type of wedding insurance is wedding liability insurance. And that protects you if there's any property damage or injuries caused that occurred during the wedding that you're responsible to. So when people say wedding insurance, they're real talking about two separate and distinct policies.
Which do you think is the most common?
Surprisingly, and this was not known to me when I got into the business, it's not cancellation insurance, it's liability insurance. But the reason that's most common is when you go to rent a venue, there's a clause in the contract that makes you responsible for any property damages or injuries caused by you or your guests. Venues, they got smart. After the wedding, they don't want to say, "Hey, Sarah, we loved having you, but there was $8,000 in property damage. Can you send a check?" Sarah goes, "Excuse me, I just paid for my wedding. I don't have another $8,000 right now." So I think that's where liability insurance came from. So liability insurance is more popular, not because people are thinking about it, but more so because venues require them to buy it to protect the venue if something's wrong.
And if you're thinking, my guests are not going to do anything to the venue, I can tell you 3 examples literally off the top of my head. When your guests start drinking, things kinda change. I know that there was one wedding, it was literally the very first, event that they had, and, somebody punched a hole in the wall in the men's bathroom.
That's probably our number one claim.
Really?
Really, it is in the guy's bathroom, damage to the bathroom. And it's holes punched in the wall and, damage to the doors. That is our number one claim for liability insurance. It's funny that you
Wow.
gave that as an example.
Yeah. The next example was actually I'm almost sure it was the 1st or 2nd wedding there. I'll go back and see if the vendor still has this picture on Facebook. Somebody sat on the vanity. It was more just like a sink. You should be sitting on this sink, and so it, like, literally ripped it out of the wall. And there was one more, and it was at a ballroom, and, it was a hotel ballroom, and somehow they were, like, moved the dividers and, like, messed up some stuff on, like, the back end of the ballroom that was actually a lot of work and stuff because they had alcohol in them, and they didn't know what they were doing, that kinda thing. So, just because you're like, "Oh, my guests won't do that," okay, let's hope they don't do that, but what if they do that?
Correct. And, a lot of it is not intentional. When they're drunk, it's obviously a different story. But, things do happen. Things do break, and sometimes it's just as simple as, some guests moving something around and they scratch the floor. But, that could be thousands of dollars to refinish the floor. And then I think we'll get into it later, but there's always the question of what if someone leaves drunk and there's an accident? You're going to get sued. Even if you had nothing to do with serving the alcohol, but you're going to get sued. And people say, "Oh, well, my guests would never sue me." It's like that might be true, but whoever they hit will.
Mentioning the floors, I that brought back, we had it's a historic venue in downtown. The photographer wanted to move a table out of the way, and it was a big, huge, like, wooden table, and they went to move it, and they scraped across the historic floors. Things happen. Who purchases the wedding insurance? Is it the couple? Is it the parent? If the parent is paying, how is that determined?
Most often, the person who signed the contract with the venue signs because they're the one that signed on the contract and it makes them legally liable for it. I get a lot of calls from people saying, "Well, I'm paying for the wedding, but someone else signed the contract. Who should buy the insurance?" And I try to explain to them legal liability doesn't follow the money, it follows whose signature is on the contract. Now, the caveat to that is if they're only buying cancellation insurance, yes, that should be bought by the person who's putting out the money because they're the ones that are at risk.
Being in Kentucky, we have a lot of beautiful horse farms and private estate weddings here. What I've kind of heard over the years is to encourage the homeowner to go through their homeowner's insurance and get like an event policy for that. Is that what you would recommend for like a farm wedding, or would you recommend like going through you for something like that?
All right. So the most common is, somebody rents a farm or an outdoor venue to have it. Homeowners insurance will sometimes be extendable to that. You'll pay an additional fee to your homeowner's agent for extending and covering the wedding. And what I always say is that's great and that can work. Usually the cost to do that is more expensive than our insurance. The big downside is if there's a claim, your homeowners and premiums are going to go up the next year. Where if there's a claim with our liability policy, your premiums don't increase. And that's what, why do you want to bring the risk of something like that, I guess, into your house where you could potentially have increased premiums for years on end because of some dumb mishap?
That had actually never crossed my mind if you did have to file a claim.
Correct. I mean, that's been there, done that. Now,
Yeah.
the other side of it is it's a little more complicated. If the wedding is at your own home, you really should rely on your homeowner's insurance for that. Event insurance or event liability policies, they exclude something called first party property damage. So, which means if it's your home and is damage to your home, our policy won't cover it. That's supposed to be on your homeowner's policy. And that really takes away one of the big benefits of having a policy for your own home. The other thing that comes into play there, and this is from the insurance company's perspective, if you're a venue that you rent yourself out on a regular basis for having parties, chances are you don't have Picassos and Monets hanging on the wall. At your own home, you very well could. Not everyone does, obviously, but you could have expensive art, expensive furnishing. That the liability policy, the underwriters is like, this policy for $119 that we sell, it's not meant to insure fine works of art or really expensive furnishings. It's meant to insure damage to a property that's used all the time for events.
Let's say you're having your company Christmas party at your house, for example, and let's say there's no alcohol involved in this company Christmas party, and somebody falls and breaks a leg. How does that work if you have a policy versus you don't have a special event policy?
That's a question that comes up all the time, and it begs another question. Someone falls and breaks their leg. What caused them to fall? Someone trips and falls at a venue. There's three possible scenarios. There's something defective or negligent by the venue. There's something that the insured who has a liability policy, call it the venue renter, the bride or groom, they did, or the person tripped over their own 2 feet. So when someone trips and falls, insurance follows fault. It doesn't just pay for anything for any reason. So in the situation where someone tripped and fell and it was due to, say, a loose paver or loose railing at the venue, that's going to be on the venue. The other side of it is, let's say the bride and groom turn off all the lights coming into the ballroom because they want to make a surprise entrance. And a guest is walking down a dark walkway. Nothing's broken, nothing's loose, and they trip and fall. That would be on the bride and groom, and that would fall on our own insurance. Now, let's assume the third scenario is the guest is walking down that walkway, no loose paver stones, no loose railing, properly lit, and they just simply trip and fall over the expression is they trip or fall over their own 2 feet. That's on them. There's no the fault on that, and they're going to make a claim with their health insurance, but that's not a liability claim.
Let's dive into alcohol. I talk about alcohol and how frustrating it is in Kentucky on almost every podcast. We do not have what is considered a licensed bartender in the state of Kentucky. We have star certified bartenders. And a lot of times, honestly, these venues just don't know that, and they will have in their contracts that you have to have a licensed bartender. There are some venues that will require the caterer with the liquor license, which is always going to be my number one recommendation. Let's talk all things alcohol and how this can affect your wedding day, your wedding insurance, and literally your life after the wedding as well.
Sure, happy to do that. As a wedding planner, weddings with alcohol, I'm sorry, are more fun than weddings without alcohol. It's just the way the world works. I can't fix that. So what you see with alcohol related injuries, it's once again, whose fault is it? With respect to bartenders, there's tip certified, there's licensed, there's a lot of different names for that. From our perspective, they're all irrelevant. Tip certified, licensed, any other designation doesn't speak to insurance. So you have a licensed certified bartender that overserves someone and they leave drunk because the bartender, kept on encouraging him to have shots and there's an accident. Question is whose insurance kicks in? you've now hired a licensed bartender with no insurance. You're in trouble. So what I tell venues and I tell anyone who asks in couples when they call, only hire bartenders with insurance. If they have the insurance, which is a higher bar than certification, they'll have the certification. 99 out of 100 times, maybe 100 out of 100 times, if someone is hiring a bartender without insurance, it's because they're trying to save money. Don't do it. It's not worth it. Only hire professional bartenders who carry their own insurance. It's that simple. One of the things that gets confusing for people is a lot of the contracts say have insurance and you have to have liquor liability insurance. The venues are just wrong when they write it like that. There's two policies. There's something called host liquor liability and liquor liability. They sound very similar, but they're two very different policies. Host liquor coverage comes with our liability policies. It's included free of charge, but it only works if the bartender has their own liquor liability insurance. And basically, think of host liquor liability is liquor liability insurance for people who are not in the business of serving or distributing alcohol. Liquor liability is for people who are in the business of serving it. And what people have to understand is if you hire a friend to bartend that night, they're in the business that night. There's no requirement that they have to be in the business for 3 years before that. The second they step onto that property and they step behind the bar, they are in the business of serving alcohol and they need to have liquor liability insurance. One other thing that comes up with this all the time, beer and wine are liquor. So is hard seltzer. Liquor is not limited to vodka, tequila, scotch, and bourbon. If it has alcohol in it, it's liquor.
I think actually episode 1 of this season, was with Diane from Type A Catering, and she talked about how, sometimes she has to be the bad guy and cut people off at weddings, whereas sometimes if it's a friend that is a bartender or just somebody that maybe works at a bar downtown or something, they're not going to cut someone off, or they're gonna be less likely to cut someone off, whereas someone who has a liquor license through the state wants to protect that because you can't get those very often in Kentucky. They're gonna protect that, and they're gonna protect the people, and they're more likely to cut a guest off than just a friend,
Right.
basically.
And just like the homeowners premium, remember the real bartenders have liability insurance and they pay premiums on that monthly. They're going to be careful because they know if there's an alcohol related claim, their premium's going to go up and they don't want that.
And being in Kentucky, I talked a little bit about the farms. Getting to those farms, they're curvy roads. There are some venues here that require you to book a shuttle from downtown or, from a hotel to get your guests there. Not all venues require that, so we do have curvy roads, we have random weather here, so it's one of those we never know what's going to happen. But let's talk about just this is one of those worst case scenarios. Do you have any examples of where someone had to file a claim because of an alcohol related issue from a wedding?
I do. And I have one that is a messed up claim right now. Hasn't been resolved, so I can't tell you how it goes. A couple was having a wedding at a venue. The venue does not provide alcohol or bartenders. They went to a local liquor store, bought the alcohol, which is fine. The liquor store had sent some employees over to serve the alcohol. They served it to a minor who consumed it, left, and got in a car accident and hurt someone else. Everyone is pointing fingers at everyone. The advantage of having the liability insurance is when the bride and groom got the finger pointed at them, at least our insurance company steps in and defends them and says, hey, this was the liquor store's fault. They supplied the bartenders. It's their fault for serving the minor. And the only one that's going to end up ahead in this are all the lawyers. That is a bad one. That's the only one that comes to mind. We've had other ones, but thank God nothing major other than that. No one killed, no one severely injured.
The planner and me, and I'm sure the planner and attorney and you, is we have to think about what can happen and what could go wrong versus just like, well, let's hope it doesn't happen. I'm always trying to think 5 steps ahead. If we do this, what is the possible outcome?
Yeah. I mean, and one thing I'll tell brides and grooms all the time, and I tell this to venues who require insurance also. The more insurance policies you can put between you and the person suing you, the better. If you're a venue and you've got your insurance, you've got the renter's insurance, and you've got a insurance from the vendor, that's 3 policies. That's about as close as you're gonna get to a good shield.
Let's talk about this little thing that happened in 2020 called the pandemic. I'm sure that you saw what it did completely to our industry. We were one of the states that was very locked down. We did not really get to do weddings again until April of 2021 that were over about 40 to 50 people. Walk me through how, if we were to, God forbid, ever have something like that happen again, how does wedding insurance protect that? Did it change after that?
Simple answer is everything changed. It's no one went back to the way it was before. Insurance companies across the board wrote pandemic exclusions into their policies. If you're selling a $10,000 cancellation policy for $160, you can't have every single person make a claim. You can't, hey, any offer where I'll give you 160, you give me back 10,000. A company can't survive. So everything changed. And this is where it's unfortunate for the bride and grooms. The insurance companies excluded pandemics. And they have to, otherwise they'd go out of business. Where it became unfortunate is all of the venues and all of the vendors rewrote their force majeure and their non-refundable deposit clauses. Basically, they said, we're a small business. We cannot take the risk of losing every single customer, in on a Thursday. So we're going to shift that risk to the bride and groom. And that's exactly what happened. And there's no good answer for it. They've taken the risk of loss and they said, we're not going to assume it. We're going to put it on the bride and groom. I get a number of bride and grooms that are attorneys or their parents are attorneys, and they try to negotiate those clauses with the venues. I have not had one that's been successful. The best they can do is negotiate a really good rebooking policy that gives them a year or 2 years to rebook with a full credit going forward. And most venues and photographers as well as and caterers will all accommodate that. But bottom line is, after the pandemic, the risk of financial loss due to a pandemic is on the bride and groom.
Military. There's typically something in contracts that anything military related is allowed to be pushed, rescheduled. Do you still recommend having insurance to cover that?
I do. Military deployments are a very common case for cancellation clauses. It doesn't cover automatic deployments, period, end of story. What it says is you have to have a previously granted leave revoked. So if anyone calls me up and asks me about it, I explain, get something from your CO, your commanding officer, that says on this date, you can attend your wedding off base. You're not confined to base. And if that gets revoked, then that's absolutely can be a rise for a claim. There is a general exclusion for wars, which up until a little over 3 months ago, no one thought about. Maybe as of this Friday, you won't have to worry about it again. But there is a general exclusion. A lot of ways people can look at insurance is, if every single person who buys that policy can make a claim if something happens, then the insurance company will go out of business and they're not going to get paid. So they try to insure against things that are unexpected, unanticipated, that affect a very small group or an individual, but not the entire group of policyholders. So, in a nutshell, military deployments are covered as long as it's a revocation of a previously granted leave and there's not an active war going on.
And I will say, whenever I did full service planning, I did have a wedding have to be moved because of military reasons. It was one of the brides that we only communicated with email or text, and she called one day, and I was like, "Oh, no, why is she calling?" And so it was to tell me that his schedule had been changed, and there was nothing that they could do about it, and we had to, move the wedding to the following Saturday. It was in September, which in Kentucky is very popular. Honest to God, I have no idea how it happened, but every single one of her vendors was actually available that following Saturday. It was just pure luck on our end. But so it does happen, and that was one of those instances. It should have his schedule was set a year in advance. It shouldn't have changed, but 2 months out, it did.
It happens, and it's, military deployments are not uncommon. And say in those situations, the wedding's not canceled; it's just postponed. The bride and groom are still going to get married. They're common. Anytime people ask, I say, please just get something in writing from your commanding officer saying, "Hey, Jess, enjoy your wedding. On July 4th weekend, you're free. You don't have to be on base."
So I did want to talk about 2 different situations that we've had in our area recently that has really brought insurance to head here. One of those, we had a property management company that was managing large Airbnbs that would host, or that could hold, like, 50 to 75 guests-ish, like, they would have pools, they were basically big mansions, and so they would have they had houses all across the US, but we had probably 8 or 10 within an hour or 2 of here. They would have them on VBRO and then Airbnb, and then they would have a separate website. A couple would book it on Airbnb, for example, for their wedding because they advertised
Mhm.
that they did weddings.
Right.
And then this company would email them and say, "Hey, actually, if you want to book it directly through our website, we'll give you a little bit of discount." So they would cancel their listing on Airbnb, book it through this company, through their website. This company would then list that date again on Airbnb, book it again for someone else, and do that same thing. They were doing this for all of those properties. And we had Facebook groups about this. We had vendors knowing about this. We had couples that were finally figuring out about this. We took it to the news station to try and like put it out there because in the beginning, vendors would go above and beyond for couples to help them try to find them venues last minute. Like these couples would find out 2 weeks ahead of their wedding that they couldn't have that property for their wedding because someone else
Yeah.
already had it or they were just being straight up canceled. And it got to the point where vendors, we couldn't pull the weight of them anymore. We could only help for so long. So in that instance, again, I encourage everyone to have wedding insurance. But how does that play into like if you're essentially like scammed by a vendor and you lose out on your venue, for example, 2 weeks before your wedding, and you then have to go and book another venue that is going to be ten to $15,000 out of pocket that you were not planning to pay.
That's one of the types of things that wedding insurance or wedding cancellation insurance is meant to cover. It doesn't matter if the venue burns down, if you got scammed out of it, or something else like that. As long as you weren't aware of any issues when you bought the insurance, that then you can absolutely make a claim. You'll get reimbursed for your lost deposit and you can go book another venue.
So if you get reimbursed for your like lost deposit or your lost payment to like, we'll say that Airbnb company, the property management company, and then you have to book your new venue in like 4 days. How quickly does, like, insurance claims, like, turn around to be able to for the couple to do that? Would they have to, like, pay for the next venue on a credit card or a check if they didn't have that? Or if they had it, or how does the claim process
Yeah,
run?
typically a fast claim will get handled in about 2 weeks. And that is if it's very straightforward, the paperwork is clean. A lot of the time, it depends on the insured of a bride and groom. How quickly do they get the documents, the contract, the proof of payment, proof of loss to the claims adjuster, and then you can turn them around very quickly. Things like medical claims, where you have to get information from hospitals and doctors, take a lot longer, but claims can be handled in as little as 2 weeks if everything is straightforward. The more complicated it is, the more moving parts you have. All of that pushes it back. Whether and we do see that. Unfortunately, if someone has their wedding canceled or something goes wrong with the venue a week before, it's really hard to get that settled and money in their bank account in time to book another venue right away. So that's, but that's life.
So if the couple did not have another $10,000 that they could get a hold of to book another venue by that date, would you encourage them to postpone it all, or would it kinda depend on the amount that they had bought the policy for?
It's really up to the couple. If their wedding gets canceled on a Thursday, chances are they're gonna have to rebook to another date unless they can find another venue and have the funds to cover that venue. But that's something that's really not an insurance question. That's more of a life financial planning question than an insurance question.
We have had 4 venues in our area that have burnt in the past year. I don't know of any venues that have burned in my entire career, and we've had 4. They're all in different cities, all completely different kinds, all completely different reasons, all very popular venues, and so those venues have been great about helping their couples find venues, that kinda thing. So my next question was about if a venue burnt, would it be kind of the same type of policy?
It would be the same thing. It's a little bit different. If a venue burns down, that venue is legally obligated to return the deposit to their customer. Venues can't write, they can write it in their contract, but it's not enforceable. Say, if I don't host your wedding because something I did, I still get to keep the money. It doesn't work like that. So they have to give back the money. But, the situation comes up with venue burns down. They're like, okay, we'll pay you back the money, but you have to make a claim and it's going to take a couple weeks to pay you back. And the issue is, so you'll get paid back from the venue, you'll make a claim. But what about your photographer, your caterer, your florist, who all said, look, you were supposed to get married on Saturday the 3rd. We were ready, willing, and able to go forward. It's not our fault your venue burned down. We are not going to refund your deposits, and we're not going to give you a credit to a future date because we didn't do anything wrong. And by the way, that's how we make our money. That's how we make our livelihood. Why should I make no money that weekend because of something that's unfortunate happened? That's really where cancellation insurance comes in. So, in this situation, venue burns down, venue's going to make a full refund, but you've got to move your wedding to another venue, which is, a month later. What about all the other moving parts and all the other people that have your money and aren't going to refund it because they didn't do anything wrong?
When does someone need to purchase wedding insurance? Like, I feel like so many scenarios can happen. Do we have to have the wedding insurance purchased before these things happen? Or, like, how does that work?
Well, that's a yes. You always have to have the insurance purchased before. But what I tell most people is as soon as you start to put down deposits, that's when you should buy wedding insurance or wedding cancellation insurance because you have money at risk. And the other question people ask is, how much should I buy? And I say, buy enough to cover the entire cost of the wedding based on, your estimated budget. Because if something goes wrong the day before the wedding and you paid everyone in full, you could potentially lose everything. A lot of people think, oh, I'm just going to buy it for the venue. It's like, that's okay. But, if you have a $20,000 wedding and your venue's 10 and something goes wrong on Friday, you're going to lose 20. You'll get 10 back from insurance, but that's not exactly going to make you whole.
Let's talk weather. In Kentucky, we do have very bizarre weather. There have been weddings that have happened in January and February where we've had blizzards. Anytime a couple is planning for a winter wedding like that, I encourage them to do a hotel, because our hotels here will literally put the vendors up. They will have the staff stay on site. That way, that wedding can still happen because those flowers are ordered, those vendors are booked, the food has been ordered. If they're not at a hotel or in a situation like that and we get a storm, how does that work?
Our policies do cover cancellations or postponements due to severe weather. There's a couple of, caveats on there. One, you have to buy the policy at least 14 days before the wedding. The reason being is you can't go look at the weather forecast, 2 days before and say, okay, I should buy a policy now. So it does cover severe weather. The misconception that people sometimes have is bad weather that you really don't like doesn't rise to a degree for a cancellation claim. The weather's got to be severe enough that it prevents you from having the wedding. And examples of that are the roads are closed or they're washed out, something where more than half the guests can't make it to the wedding. But it also includes, what they call immediate family members, bride, groom, parents, and grandparents, if they can't make it. And where you get an interesting scenario is the weddings in Southern California. A bride and groom, or the mother of the bride are coming from Kentucky, and there's severe weather in Kentucky and she can't travel. That could rise to the reason for a cancellation of my mom can't be here. She got snowed in, she got something happened there and she can't fly in. That could be covered date. Obviously, they look at it, well, was your mom flying in the morning of the wedding or was she flying in 3 days before? Morning of the wedding is not real smart planning. 3 days before is probably okay.
And this is one of those, not only does I mentioned the snowstorm scenario, but weather affects us year round, especially here. You could look back to 2024 when we had Hurricane Helene in Florida,
Mhm.
and then we had all of the rain in the Asheville area, and they had tons of damage there. We ended up getting part of that Asheville area storm. We did not have electricity in Lexington that Friday and Saturday. So we still had popular venues on that Saturday at 2 o'clock that did not have electricity. So it's not just snow, it's not just, basics. It can be anything. And there were couples that had waited until that Friday to get their marriage license, but the city offices were closed that day because they didn't have electricity. So it's one of those, you do have to plan for the unexpected. And this is where the planner part in me is like, you have to be prepared for everything.
Correct. We paid out a number of claims in Asheville that year
Oh, I'm sure.
in the surrounding areas. We had a couple of venues that sent a lot of business to us, but they were completely wiped off the map. We had a lot of claims, but luckily the people bought insurance and we were able to settle them, and those were relatively easy to settle.
One other scenario that I wanted to make a note of. We had a really popular venue here. They don't do weddings anymore, but for a while there would be maybe 1,000 people on property that day, and they had just kind of a venue there as well. The wedding cards got stolen, and the bride and groom blamed the caterer for that. They said that the caterer was the only one in the building when that happened. This is a caterer that I would use for any event that I ever did. I wholeheartedly trust them, trust their staff. They have full-time staff. There's never been a problem with that catering company whatsoever. So I would bet money that no one from the catering company took it. I don't know what ended up happening with that, but is there part of an insurance policy that covers a situation like that? If cards get stolen, how do you even figure out what amount or what was stolen?
Yeah, we do see a number of those claims. Most of them don't get approved. And
Okay.
the reason being is it does cover, the disappearance of or the if gifts are stolen and the card is considered a gift. From my experience, they don't get stolen. They get thrown out in the trash. We get claims from people, oh, there wasn't enough cards or enough money in there. And I know my friends gave me more money. So I want to make a claim for what I think is missing. That's not going to happen. The first litmus test with that is, did you file a police report? If I thought something was stolen from me, I would call the police. If they don't call the police, then it's generally considered what they call a mysterious disappearance, and it's probably not going to be covered. So the policy does cover theft. There's limits for cash and things like that, but it's got to be a theft. It can't be, oh, I just couldn't find this after the wedding. I thought we had these here. I thought I had, 50 cards with cash in them and I could only find 30 of them. So the other 20 must have been stolen.
Things just go missing after weddings. Like, I have a bride that lost a veil. We flipped everything upside down, looked everywhere. We still to this day, we never found that veil, and there was no reason for said veil to disappear. So things just disappeared.
Things disappear. Look, I'll put on my wedding planner hat. I know very well that things get set down all over a wedding venue. I also know very well that after the wedding's over, all of the vendors come in there like vacuum cleaners picking up their stuff. And they will pick up anything that's close to their stuff and throw it in their truck. And at the same time, the cleaning crews are just throwing things in garbage bags. So things do disappear. But that's different than them being stolen. Part of the philosophy on that is bride and groom, what precautions did you take so these envelopes with checks and money in it would be safeguarded? Oh, I left them all on the corner of the stage. Probably not the best idea.
So now that couples are listening to this, and if they were back and forth on getting insurance, hopefully they now are 100% going to get insurance for their wedding day. Let's talk about pricing and what type of policy should they get? What is like the bare minimum? What do you recommend? And what do you maybe see the most of?
We see the most liability policies. And the reason for that is that, like I said earlier, venues require it. So that's an easy one. We sell $1 million policy for $119. To me, that's a no brainer. Take the $1 million policy, buy it. You're protected if something catastrophic happens. On the cancellation side, our policies start at $75 for 5,000 in coverage and goes up to $725 for 100,000 in coverage. So it's inexpensive security blanket. And what I say to couples and everyone is having insurance doesn't guarantee that no matter what happens, it's going to be covered. But not having insurance guarantees that nothing is covered. So I tell brides and grooms is if you're having a $30,000 wedding and something goes wrong and you don't mind writing another $30,000 check, don't bother with insurance. If writing another $30,000 check is going to set you back, then that's a little over a $300 policy, $300 to buy that policy. You tell me, just $300 that gets you 30, is that a good bet?
What is the process of filing a claim? I'm sure it's different for each type, but also if it's a cancellation policy, what proof do you have to have? What receipts do you have to have? What's just kind of the process for filing a claim?
Yeah, so it's simple. So the process to file a claim, we have a link on our site. They go there, they fill out a real simple form. It basically, what's your name, what's your contact information, what's your customer ID number, and please provide a description of what happened, and you can upload any documents you want. At that point, a claims adjuster from the insurance company gets in touch with you. They review your claim. They'll ask for additional documentation. They'll maybe want to speak to other people that were involved in the claim. But basically, what you need to do is you need to upload a contract, proof of payment, proof of loss. That's it. It depends on what the claim is for, but it's relatively simple. If a photographer doesn't show up, it's here's the copy of my photography contract. Here's the copy of the check or the credit card statement to the photographer. And a photographer who doesn't show up is not going to cooperate. You just put a affidavit that you make a statement to the adjuster that the photographer wasn't there. That's it.
How long after a wedding day happens does a couple have to file a claim?
It's a reasonableness standard. There is a statute of limitations on it. I don't know what it is because no one waits, 2 years to file a claim. But it's reasonable, and it would depend on the type of claim. Most people file a claim within a week or two after their wedding. I had a claim that came in just the other day from some property damage to a venue that happened back in January. And the reasonableness there was I didn't know this could have been covered. And she's like, well, now that I was talking to the venue about something else, like, oh, I didn't realize that this damaged my property, back in January. Can I still make a claim? I said, absolutely. If you're just now learning that that property damage could be covered, you can make the claim.
And see, to me, that would have been like the first thing that you would have, that was my first question is about the property damage. So it's interesting
Correct.
to always see, both sides of things.
Yeah, you very, very much so. But the thing to remember is insurance is there to protect the person who bought it, the named insured, which typically the bride and groom or the parents of the bride or groom who buy the insurance. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a good solution. And if you're having a $30,000 wedding and both wedding liability and cancellation insurance are going to cost you $300 or $400. It's worth spending that money to alleviate that risk.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about vendor insurance. There are some venues here that require every single vendor that comes on property to show a copy of their insurance policy. Most vendors will have a policy that is year round all the time on their business liability, equipment, all of those things. But if it were, say, like an aunt that is a florist, a hobby florist, and she's going to be doing your wedding, and she has to provide insurance to the venue, is that something that you can help her with since she's not technically a business? How does that kind of work?
Yeah, we do sell that. We do sell day of vendor liability insurance. And it's for florists, decorators, wedding planners, caterers, photographers, florists, DJs, bands, people like that. And what people say is, well, my aunt's not, she doesn't, she's not in the business of being a florist. So why does she need insurance? And what I try to explain is when she steps foot on that venue on that day, she is a florist. She's wearing the hat of a florist. She's doing what a florist would normally do. She needs to buy liability insurance. And it's not expensive. A florist can buy day of liability insurance for $125. It it's again, it's a no-brainer. When that aunt is done being a florist and sits in, one of the pews for the ceremony, she's now a guest, but she had a dual role that day. An hour before that, she was climbing up on a ladder hanging decor and flowers. That's a florist, and we get it most often from DJs and photographers. I don't do this all the time. I'm just doing it for a friend. It's like spend the $125, buy the insurance. It means you're protected.
And then one of the questions I had asked some of the planners, if I sent them my list of questions and asked them if there's anything else they wanted to add to it. And one of them mentioned, I may not say the word right, is subrogation.
Yes, I can
Okay.
explain. It's called a subrogation and a waiver of subrogation. You will see it. It's only from venues. There's no waiver of subrogation for a planner, a florist, a photographer. When an insurance company pays a claim, let's say they insure you, Sarah, and they pay a claim for something that happened. Someone injured you. The insurance company has the right to then go after the person that caused the injury under a principle of subrogation. It's basically they stand in your shoes. If you didn't have insurance, you would sue the person who hurt you. If the insurance company pays you, they get the right to sue that person. If that person is a company as the venue, a waiver of subrogation means you cannot sue them. The insurance company pays you and they don't get to recoup or recover that payment from the venue. So you'll see a waiver of subrogation required by venues saying, hey, if we do something wrong and your insurance pays out, you can't come after us. So it's a complicated subject, but I'll give an example that might be too long, but hopefully I'll try to make it short. You're having a wedding at a venue. The venue is serving alcohol. They have a liquor license. It's their bar, their bartenders, all of that. They overserve someone. They leave drunk and get in an accident. You get sued and the venue gets sued. Costs you $25,000 in legal fees to get out of the lawsuit because you had nothing to do with serving the alcohol. The insurance company that paid that $25,000 in legal fees then going to go to the venue and say, hey, you owe us $25,000 because I would not have had to spend this money but for you over serving people. With a waiver of subrogation, the insurance company cannot go to the venue and ask for that $25,000 back.
Talk to me a little bit about eWed, and are you basically just kind of like an insurance broker for wedding insurance? Do you only specialize in wedding insurance? Do you work with other types of insurance? Kind of how does your company work?
We are a specialty broker in special event insurance. So we do insurance just for special events. I don't offer auto, home, life, any of the personal lines. The bulk of our business is weddings, just because that is the type of event people spend the most money on. But we also do, our bat mitzvahs, anniversaries, birthday parties, high school graduations, things like that. We can also cover events that are not listed on our website. We just need to go through a more traditional application process for that.
I'm so excited to know this information, just like the geek in me, the nerd in me, the planner in me. This is information that I have wanted to know for so long. Is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that you think you need to add or share with a couple, share with parents, share with vendors?
I think we've scratched the surface. There's so many more aspects to it and legs to it. And I would encourage people if they have questions, they could email us directly at info@ewed, E-W-E-D, insurance.com, or they can go to our blog on our website. And the whole way we design the blog articles and our FAQs is, what are the questions or scenarios we hear or see most often? Let's put them down in writing on paper so they have them as a reference source. That's really the easiest thing. And next thing is, if someone has a question, send us an email, pick up the phone and call us. We're more than happy to talk to them.
Perfect. And I will say that your blog was fantastic. I did not read it. I saw the different questions that were asked because I wanted to ask those questions today and just carry the conversation. But there was such good information on there. It was very well organized for my ADHD brain. I could focus on things. I will put all of David's information in the show notes. I will put the blog links in there, how to follow them, how to get quotes, all of those things. But David, thank you again for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And, would love to do it again. And if you want to get a group of people together, always happy to help. It's just, this is valuable information for people. And it's like you don't know what you don't know until it's too late.
Wedding planning doesn't have to be overwhelming, and you don't have to do it alone. If you want guidance you can trust, I would love to help. At Simply Love Studio, I offer free wedding consultations where we talk through your vision, your budget, and what steps make the most sense for you. There's no pressure, no obligations, no catches, no gimmicks, just honest advice and support to help you move forward with confidence. You can schedule your free consult anytime at simplylovestudio.com, and I promise you'll walk away with clarity and a plan.